Kia ora, tēnā tātou, kia koutou, nau mai hara mai ki tēnei kauhaurangi I tēnei rā, māku I karakia mā tātou, just extending a very warm welcome to everyone today for this amazing webinar and this awesome kōrero that we're going to have together. I'm going to start us off with a karakia to open our hui. Tēnei te mauri ka piki aki ki te rangi etu nei, he rangi atua, he rangi tipua, he rangi tawhito. Kia whiti, ko te mātauranga, kia tau, ko te māramatanga. Whaia, kia tata, puritia, kia mau, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Kia ora and welcome.
Kia ora, thank you Janelle. Ko ramataka te maunga. Ko te awa kārangi, te awa, no whakatiki aho. Ko Weaver, toku whānau, ko Andrew, toku wingawa. Kia ora, my name is Andrew Weaver. I'm the Executive Director of Digital Identity in New Zealand. I am proudly from the hut, which is what I talked about just in my introduction there, Pipiha, and want to welcome you all to this wonderful occasion. We are celebrating the launch of the launch of Women in Identity in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Australia, and meeting some wonderful people, wonderful ambassadors for the organisation, and also talking about some of the challenges and opportunities which exist for us in digital inclusion, the digital divide, addressing some very real and sometimes raw issues when it comes to accessing technology and services that rely on technology. What we will do in a moment is I will be handing over to the Women in Identity team, and we are going to hear from them a little bit of the origin story, also meeting the wonderful ambassadors who are with us as well. From a housekeeping perspective, we do encourage you to interact, particularly via Q&A if you've got questions, and especially when we get into the panel discussion, really encourage you to ask questions via the Q&A. You can also go in there and participate. If you like a question, you could hit the thumbs up, and that'll give us an indication as to the topics that you would like us to navigate in that particular session as well. Encourage you also to utilize the chat feature of Zoom. Had some really cool suggestions that a great way to use that is to, if you feel like introducing yourselves to the rest of the audience, please pop in a little note, where you're from, what interests you, why you're here, that sort of stuff. So use the chat as a chat. If you've got a particular question for the panelists or for the Women in Identity team, then please use the Q&A. That really is about it in terms of the housekeeping front. It's reasonably straightforward. I should say that this session is being recorded. We will make it available. Some people aren't able to attend live, so we will be making it available to them afterwards. So just so everyone is aware of that as well. From a digital identity perspective, as I said, we're proud, honoured to be hosting this kōrero, this conversation today. We've got some exciting things in the pipeline. We've been doing work, if you're familiar with the work last year, we had a research project looking at people's perceptions and attitudes around digital identity and trust. And we have been undertaking right at the moment, that research is in a second year at the moment, and a little bit more of a deeper dive around some of the topics we're going to be navigating today, indeed around diversity and inclusion and some of the barriers that exist in different pockets and areas of our communities. That research is going to be published next month. And so it's going to be a big feature of our activity, certainly towards the end of the month. So we're really looking forward to that and welcome your engagement and participation in that as well. So, so with that, what I'm going to do is hand over to the wonderful Tamara. And Tamara is going to lead us through the introductions of the ambassadors. So I will turn myself off video for the moment, and I'll be joining you a little bit later on as we rejoin and talk about the panel discussion.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, all. My name is Tamara. I currently work in the digital identity space at Datacom in Wellington, where actually both myself and Amy, who are the New Zealand ambassadors for women in identity, reside. I have been in the identity and access management space for the past 7.5 years. And recently, sort of at the start of this year, before all of COVID hit, I had the pleasure of meeting Diane Joyce, who mentioned to me women and identity, their missions and values, some of the stuff that they get up to and the connections that they create about putting together thought leadership and thinking around digital identity solutions that are made for all by all. It wasn't really a hard sell for me to join in on that. I really appreciated some of the forward thinking that the group brings together, the catch-ups that they make, and some of the really interesting conversations and problems that everybody is trying to solve in their different regions and their different capacities. In our panel today, we've got Amy Di Benedetto, who is a New Zealand Ambassador for Women and Identity, Carolina and Malika, who are the ambassadors in Australia, Diane Joyce, who will be walking us through the Women and Identity presentation to explain to you who Women and Identity are as an organization and what will they be doing or what they bring to the table. And on our panel, we have Janelle, Kim, Elena, Pamela Moss, and Kay. I'll pass it on to you, Andrew. Potentially we get the presentation up for Diane to walk us through who Women and Identity is, and then each panelist can talk to who they are and what they do.
Well, indeed. Before we do that, we are going to get the wee origin story of our wonderful ambassadors, apart from Tamara. So, choosing who is next, and I'm just going to go by who's on my screen. Carolina, would you like to show us your wonderful face and tell us a bit about you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So happy to be on the panel again with a different hat this time. So for many of you who don't know me, my name is Carolina Gallegos. My day job is looking after risk for Visa. I am Sydney-based, and I look after risk for Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. My lovely American accent can give you a hint that I've not always been based here. So I've been based here for roughly around 4 years. Miami is home. And I haven't really gotten into the identity space until the last couple of years when we were really looking at driving standards in Australia and also in New Zealand, just because I've got a little bit of coverage there. So you can't really talk about fraud and risk without bringing in this concept of authentication, identity, and verification. And that's always been kind of hand in hand. So my background has been primarily in payments. And I got into the women and identity aspect of it just by having a conversation with Emma Lindley, one of the founders, who at the time was at Visa, and I was immediately struck by not only her wealth of knowledge in the space, but more than anything, her passion for ensuring that solutions that are developed in this space are accessible for all. And over the past couple of weeks, I've actually started reflecting on my journey, my friends, my family, my cousins, and how they access some of these technologies, and how if we're not really aware of how some of these technologies are developed, any systemic discrimination can be amplified. So that awareness aspect and going down the path of developing guidelines on technology development would be where I see my involvement in women and identity more predominantly. And just from a personal level, thinking about my sister who is Down syndrome, developmentally disabled, and how she accesses some of these technologies very different to the way most of us would. And thinking about my family, my cousins back in my home country of Ecuador, who look very different to me. I've got a range of blonde hair, blue-eyed cousins, and then I've got the other range of dark-haired, dark-skinned cousins, and kind of every flavor in between. And to think that there could be a negative impact as to how some of these technologies were implemented and disadvantage some of my personal connections, it really drives me to want to do better. And And that's kind of been my driving force behind becoming an ambassador for women identity. So I do encourage you to join us in that discussion. And after you hear a little bit about what the group is doing from Diane, it would be great to continue that.
Yeah. Thank you, Carolina. That's awesome. I haven't heard the whole story before. And it's wonderful to hear that sort of family background as well as the passion you bring. So thank you, Kia ora. What I'm going to do, and I encourage you to just stay on video there, Tamara. We've really been interested to you, so you could turn your video back on as well. I want to see your face too. Thank you. And we are going to get Malika. If you could please join and tell us a little bit about your role as ambassador and how you came to get it.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Malika Sathi. I currently work for MasterCard, where I look after our cyber and intelligence business across Australasia. Now, MasterCard is really sort of committed to the space, the identity space. And, you know, it relates to our core payments business. So, you know, like Carolina, we see the sort of interlinkages between identity and our core business of payments. And, you know, we've invested and are a sponsor in the Women in Identity program, which shows sort of the organization's commitment in this space. And so I had the opportunity to join Women in Identity as part of that relationship between the two organizations. I have been working in payments, you know, very similar to Carolina for a chunk of my career. And I'll just see, I can see that the video is can you still hear me?
We can, Malika. Go ahead. You should be able to turn your video on.
Okay.
Apologies.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Yeah, Zoom's doing some strange things. So I'm really passionate about, I suppose, I have been participating in Women in Payments pretty much, you know, for several years now. And I think that same sort of passion to make sure that there is representation of a diverse voice across the identity space is what drove me to participate in Women in Identity. I think we need to make sure that our voice and our perspective is included in product development in this space. And as this space emerges as a sort of an area, you know, in the coming sort of years, I feel like this is, you know, a good discussion amongst this group will really contribute to a better product development and solutions that cater for different audiences. So I'm really passionate about the topic of, you know, ensuring that you know, we're not building solutions that have bias inbuilt and exclude certain populations or segments. And you know, I feel this group will help us, you know, change the shape of identity-based solutions in the future.
Kia ora. That's awesome, Malika. You should be able to turn your video now on as well. Apologies for that.
That's okay. Thank you.
That's the end. Wonderful. There you go. Hello. And finally, our last ambassador who we're going to be introduced to today. We actually do have a sneaky ambassador from Hong Kong in the attendees list as well. But is our last New Zealand ambassador, Aotearoa Ambassador Amy. If you could tell us about yourself.
Hi everybody. I guess one of the things that kind of draw me into the identity world and into women and identity is just continuous learning. I'm a product manager, digital product manager at Bank of New Zealand in the customer onboarding and identity space. And I think what I realized in this journey is that every day, every week, I find something else that I didn't know or didn't understand. And I think as we're building identity solutions for our customers, we need to ensure that we are constantly, you know, exploring how we can know what we don't know, and understanding this space better. And I guess taking an approach where we can you know, we're constantly learning because the space is changing. A particular area that I'm interested in is the broader identity ecosystem, particularly in Aotearoa New Zealand, and how we can I guess enable better access for New Zealanders to services through identity, and just ensure that we're inclusive in doing that, because when you're a bank or another service provider, you need to be able to provide people kind of digital, safe, secure digital online access that is accessible and available, and I think the only way we can do that is by kind of working together and creating an ecosystem. So yeah, that's me.
Good. Thank you so much, Amy, and all of the ambassadors there. Now we are going to hand over to Diane Joyce. Diane, if you would like to say hello, and while you are there, I will queue up the presentation.
Kia ora, everyone. I'm Diane Joyce. I'm actually based in London, so it is 2:21 in the morning for me, but at least I'm an evening person. So I've been in the identity industry for a number of years, working alongside people like Emma Lindley and Pam. And what I've noticed in the identity industry is, whilst we have a lot of digital transformation, we don't necessarily have inclusion as part of that. And one of the areas I worked in was identity proofing, and I think it was very difficult for a lot of people to prove who they are to the degree that a lot of organisations wanted them to, and therefore they dropped out of the digital space. So that's a particular bent of mine, is that we need to be able to include everyone. And as a result, I joined Women in Identity. I'm on the exec, and my role is to look after the country ambassadors and also to look after the events that we attend to share our message. So, what is Women in Identity? We are a not-for-profit. We are run entirely by volunteers, and we've all come together to challenge the digital identity industry to be more diverse and inclusive in the delivery of service and systems. And I mean services as well. It's not, to me, just about the technology, because some people, the technology is difficult, so we need to be able to provide a service and identity. And despite what it says on our name, we're not just about women. All genders are welcome to join Women in Identity. We champion and support everyone who believes, as we do, that we can definitely do better in this space. And I think we can do a lot better in this space. So we've come a long way in a short time. We had our first proper birthday just 2 weeks ago. Last June, we launched an Identity Week in London and had a great event there. And since then, we have 1,100 plus members. We've now got 10 countries represented with 15 amazing ambassadors. And one of the things we do is we run webinars, speak at conferences, and run workshops to promote the diversity and inclusion in the digital identity industry. And for me, it's really exciting to be at this event. This is our first Australasian event, and it's quite amazing given these lovely ambassadors have only just come on board our organisation in the last couple of months, and look, they're already making a difference. So, why Women in Identity? We want to ensure that the debate about identity moves far beyond the levels of diversity currently represented in our industry. As I said, we can do better, and the way to do that is to have the debate, to bring forward the issues and to find ways to solve them. So it's vital that the debate should be reflective of everyone who may use an identity system, and especially those who are not in the mainstream and need our help to be recognised. But I think for me, the coolest thing about Women in Identity is the potential impact we can have. More diversity means we develop new technologies, which result in better businesses, more returns, more profit, and grows the economy, whilst also ensuring that groups of people aren't left behind in the digital era. It's really exciting to be part of this. So our vision, only by including a diverse range of people in the design, development, and deployment of identity solutions can we ensure that solutions will work for everyone. We have to deal with the bias, and that's conscious and unconscious bias of those who deliver identity systems. The more diverse of the groups making these systems, the better the systems will be. And previously, a lot of people got forgotten in the digital identity transformations. There's a whole group of people out there who don't have access to digital services, don't have access to the right documents to say who they are, or maybe they don't have access to the technology. Currently, they don't have a voice, but this is changing, and I'm really pleased that Women in Identity is part of that change. We're really working on making sure there's space for everyone at the table. And we do this by providing our members a platform to engage, to be supported, and most of all, to be heard. So how do we do that? We champion a more diverse workforce, inclusive of everyone, enabling them to enter, to work, and to advance in the identity industry. This helps reduce the bias in the development of identity solutions and services. We want to be the catalyst for change. We provide industry thought leadership, research, education, particularly around bias, diversity, and inclusion, and its importance in the development of the digital identity industry. Well, no, actually, the identity industry and the associated digital industries that use it. We want to be the creators of opportunity. We want more diverse representation across industry events. We want diversity in relation to gender, to age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and social status. We provide speakers, contributors, participants, and attendees at industry events. And one of the key things that I do is make sure that we do get that diversity out there. In the digital identity industry for a long time, a lot of the conferences have been very male dominated and very old, is what I call them. We need young blood coming through, and that's part of what we're doing. And we like to support our members. You know, we like to elevate them. We have some really talented people who already do great work and who might not be represented or effectively amplified across the industry. Our platform helps them be seen and be heard. So again, the key thing is all of our teams should be diverse, because the problems they're trying to solve are also diverse. Next slide, please. So if you're not a member, come and join us. Be seen and be heard, be supported, and come and be a catalyst for change. That's what we're about. You can find us at womeninidentity.org, and become a member is the link. And follow us. We're on all the major social media channels. And these are the hashtags that we use on a regular basis. And I think two of them really resonate for me. For all, by all, diversity by design. If there's two hashtags you take away today, let it be those two, because they are what we're all about. And of course, this couldn't happen without a big shout out to our sponsors. In building a platform, it takes money. Whilst we're all volunteers and we work quite happily as volunteers to provide a platform to not only engage with industry, but also a platform for our members to become able to engage with industry, it does take money. And these fantastic sponsors have all provided that money. And I have to a big shout out to them and say, thank you very much. And of course, if you do want to sponsor us, feel free to drop me an email at diane@womeninidentity.org. Thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. What an amazing group of panelists. Back to you, Andrew.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Diane. If anyone does have any particular questions for Diane or any of the ambassadors, please jump into the Q&A now, just before we get into the panel discussion, and fire anything there. Otherwise, check out the website. Please join. It's free to join.
Yes.
Just get in there,
yes.
and be part of the discussion. And it's a wonderful community. So I'm hugely enjoying being part of it as well.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I will put my video back on now. Right, I'm back. What we are going to do is thank you, Diane, Women in Identity ambassadors as well. If you turn your video off now, We may come back on later. And if we can get the panel discussion panelists, 5 wonderful women, if you could please turn on your video and audio, and we will start moving into the panel discussion. Wonderful. So what we've done, and Women in Identity is proudly an organisation which promotes diversity in tech and in identity in particular. I absolutely adore the motto. There's so much power that sits in it. That the systems we're building, if it's not everybody who's building them, then we're not truly serving the communities in which we operate. One of the other aspects of this, I guess, holistic challenge is one of inclusion. And in particular, we do hear talk of the digital divide, but may not, I guess, understand some of the nuances or even the depth of it. It's very easy for us to assume that in a first world country like ourselves or like Australia, that surely it's easy for people to access services to get online. Well, unfortunately, the reality is somewhat different from that. And it's not just technology barriers, there's other barriers that are in place. And these 5 wonderful women we have to talk with us today all have different lenses and different aspects. So working in this area or have been researching or studying or trying to design services which address some of the challenges, particularly around inclusion. So this discussion we're going to have now, while we're going to navigate a little bit around identity as part of it, really isn't an identity discussion. This is an inclusion discussion and addressing some of those challenges. So what we are going to do is I am going to ask each of the panelists, please, if you would introduce yourself. In terms of talking about who you are, also the role in which you play in your organisation or organisations. Some of you wear lots and lots of hats. And also your why. Why is this important to you? What is it that you're seeing that we need to do something about? And not putting her on the spot, hopefully, Kay Marie, I would love if you could kick off this kōrero.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. Hei, kia ora tātou. Tutahi mihi tēnei kia koutou, kua tai mai no ngā tōpito o te ao tēnā koutou. Hi uri tēnei no te tai tokerau, te tai rāwhiti, me Waikato Tainui, tēnā koutou. I'm Kay Marie Dunn. I am the co-founder of Aho, which is a decentralized platform to help whānau or individuals to upload and safely secure their own genealogy, as well as a digital archive for families and communities to store their own precious memories, information and documentation. It's been a 2-year journey and a really wonderful one. And as genealogy is our base layer, we're also exploring what will a digital identity layer look on the top of that, and how might we really broaden the perspective of identity from both a kaupapa Māori perspective and an Indigenous lens. So rather than looking at identity in this very slim perspective of information and details, that my identity is encompassing of my relationships, my parents, my grandparents, my ancestry, my connection to my natural resources. And so we're in the midst of taking that to another stage and testing it in community.
Awesome, thank you, Kay Marie. And we're going to jump straight to Elena. Elena Hickerson is a principal advisor at the Department of Internal Affairs and actually has been doing a fair bit of work with Kay Marie as she's been developing, as Kay Marie and her team have been developing Aho and everything that sits around it. Elena, very well placed to be talking, I guess, with a bit of a government view, a bit of a policy view, but you've also been doing some fascinating stuff in terms of trying to really understand the challenge a little bit better as well, right?
Ai, o tēnā koutou, tēnei te mihi mai o hā kia koutou katoa I tēnei ahiahi. Ko Elena ahau, he uri no Ngapuhi. As Andrew said, I currently work for the Department of Internal Affairs as a Principal Advisor in the Office of the Government's Chief Digital Officer. And I've been really fortunate to be spending the past year working within the Digital Identity Transition Program team. And that team has been tasked with providing advice to New Zealand Government on the future of the digital identity ecosystem within New Zealand and the role of government within that. And we work really closely with a range of stakeholders, including those represented in DIN. So I'm really thankful to have that partnership with a range of different stakeholders in that rōpū. My role within the team has been leading a portfolio of design experiments and proof of concepts, which are all about trying to build an inclusive and dynamic evidence base to help inform government policy, as opposed to sort of running a desktop policy exercise through more traditional means. So really making sure that both the public and private sector are sort of taken on the journey as we explore how this ecosystem may emerge in New Zealand. For me, when it comes to inclusion, I guess I believe we need, it was spoken about earlier, greater awareness both within government and wider society about the potential that technology systems enable when it comes to achieving equitable outcomes and enhanced wellbeing for all New Zealanders. On the flip side of that, of course, is that, you know, we need to be having more conversations about the risks inherent in those same systems in terms of causing greater inequalities if we're not purposeful in ensuring that we're really open and inclusive of a diverse range of voices and perspectives in their development. So I think it's a bit of a mindset shift that's needed when we talk about inclusion. It's about having really meaningful conversations from my perspective about what this means at the greatest levels of technology and architecture. So kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Elena. We're going to pass over now to Kim Connolly Stone, who is with Internet New Zealand and has a wonderful role as policy director there, and huge alignment with the work that Internet New Zealand are doing from a purpose perspective, right? So Kim, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and what you see.
Thanks, Andrew, and kia ora tātou. So fantastic to be just virtually surrounded by all these amazing women in tech. I'm not really a woman in tech myself. I think of myself as a policy wonk in a tech shop. So I'm the policy director for Internet New Zealand. Those of you who don't know what we do, we run the .nz domain name system, awesome little domain name system. But we're more generally, we are about helping New Zealanders harness the power of the internet. And for us, that's all about an internet for all. It's about an internet for good. And unfortunately, on that for all bit, New Zealand has quite a ways to go. And you might be kind of surprised. You know, it seems like we're doing okay. You know, government's been pretty awesome at rolling out connectivity. But it hasn't quite got to everyone. We've still got affordability issues. And now we need to broaden our consideration out around the kind of skills you need to make the most of this stuff, and also the trust you need to have in the internet and the motivation to get online. So at Internet New Zealand, one of the things we've really been trying to do is motivate the New Zealand government to make some more investments in this area. We've got a few things in the pipeline ourselves as well. One of the things maybe we'll have a chance to talk about later on this call is a little thing we've come up with recently called the Digital Inclusion 5-point plan. And it's just kind of making it pretty simple, you know, government, 5 things you need to do to really improve the situation, and that a whole lot of us can get behind you and help you do it. So that's the idea of our 5-point plan, but I'll leave it there. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Kim, and we will most definitely be navigating the 5-point plan as part of our discussion today, because it's beautifully simple in how it articulates the challenge and the opportunity, and more importantly, what we collectively need to do, which is so often missing when we talk about what the problem is, but hey, how can we roll our sleeves up and be part of the solution? Awesome, thank you so much. Looking forward to that particular part of the discussion too. Now we have Pamela Morris. Pamela is with the University of Auckland and has some quite interesting perspectives from what you were talking about, the student journey and some of those challenges as well. So another different voice, seeing things and passionate about things with a slightly different lens from certainly what I was exposed to before. So Pamela, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role.
Kia ora. I'm the Director of Planning at the University of Auckland, so I am a user of identity. We use identity information to provide information to students and about students. We have a community of, I was counting them up a little while ago, something to do with about 50,000 people are associated with the University of Auckland. And so what we found, it's quite big. So what we found during the COVID lockdown was when we moved very rapidly to provide our teaching online, which we did very early in that period, that we've had a very significant group of students who were unable to access that learning material. Now, a large number of them received computers from the university. The Tertiary Education Commission came to the party, or the government came to the party, and certainly gave us money to do that. But I was in an all-staff forum just about an hour or so ago, and was really taken by the fact that quite a popular question to come up was, so many of my students did not have good enough internet access during the lockdown to study effectively. This is in Auckland, New Zealand's biggest city, and we still had, and it is a very significant group of students. So these are students who have come all the way through the various barriers of education that we have in New Zealand to a tertiary education, to university, degree level study, and they still get knocked out at that first hurdle because they can't get past, they can't be able to study online. They can only study online if there's physical premises open to them. So that's my interest in identity and in accessibility of the internet.
Indeed, cool. And we're going to explore some of those topics a little bit. Thank you, Pamela. And last, by no means least, you've already heard from her briefly right at the beginning, is Janelle Rikiwaka, and she works with core education, but she will explain a little bit more about that, and also some particular passion she has in this area as well, right?
Kia ora, Andrew. Kia koutou ngā maraikura, tēnā koutou kia koe Andrew nau I whakarite tēnei hui. He puti wainganui I ngā wahine ki tēnei hui, nā reira tēnā koe hoa. Kia ora, ko Janelle Rikiwaka tēnei, he uri tēnei no tainui waka, no whaingaroa hau, ngari noho ana au ki o tautahi. My name's Janelle, I'm absolutely rapt to be here today amongst some beautiful wahine toa and to share our whakaaro in this space. I am a Pouhiringa Waka is my job title. I'm a relationship manager for core education, and primarily we design and co-create learning solutions for a bunch of different organisations, but fairly exclusively in the education sector. And my mahi over the 8 years or so that I've been there has primarily involved leading digital fluency programs in schools. More recently, I developed Kia Takatua Matihiko and was the National Māori Medium Lead and established that program for the digital readiness program. So that's around the new curriculum content that we have here in Aotearoa, and supporting, this was the professional learning program for teachers to understand that content. So I I work in and around the tech sector, but more importantly, my focus and my passion is in preparing our tamariki for possible careers in the tech sector, but probably more importantly, preparing the tech sector to create welcoming spaces for our tamariki and our rangatahi to want to go and work in the tech sector. So inclusion is huge on my radar, and I have a lot of passion for ensuring that we are all considering how we might diversify the tech sector, so that not just more wahine and women are there, but more importantly, for me, it's about more Indigenous people being present in the tech sector. For me, and this may be controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway, for me, inclusion has to start with honouring mana whenua and the Indigenous people in each of our countries. It needs to start in that space, because that's the space that we haven't done well for many hundreds of years. So let's start there and then ensure that everybody is included in that space. So I won't do a koho now because I'll get on the waka and keep rowing, but really, really rapt to be here. And I just want to leave you with this wee thought around education, because it's the space that I work in. I just read a stat this morning and it's kind of staggered me. About 80% of our current principals in all schools in Aotearoa are within 5 years of retirement age. So these are the people that are leading our kura, and we're starting to talk about new technological advances in terms of identity and other spaces. And the people that we need to get the education to, our tamariki in our schools, we need to think about how we are empowering those that lead schools and that provide learning to our kids. So that's my big waka, and again, just so privileged to be here and feel very grateful. So ngā mihi nui.
Thank you, Janelle. Always love the perspective you bring, and actually the grace with which you bring your perspective as well. It's a beautiful thing. Now, I'm conscious that in our audience, we actually have quite a number of people who aren't from Aotearoa. And in fact, somebody asked the question near the beginning if this discussion was only about New Zealand or only about Aotearoa. And I think you touched on it a little bit there, Janelle, that while, yes, we are talking, everybody here is working in and around the challenges and opportunities in Aotearoa. But I think some of the principles that we are talking about are universal, are international, are global. And Janelle, you just touched on that as well. So I'm conscious that as we navigate through this part of the discussion, if you do have thoughts as well on perhaps lessons and opportunities for other countries, hopefully with us perhaps providing a positive example, that please feel free to navigate and talk through some of that as well. Now, also for the audience, for the people listening in, please do encourage you to utilise the chat. I see a number of you have been doing that, which is awesome, but also the Q&A, particularly if there is something that one of the panellists says that you want to find out a little bit more of, or you're particularly curious about, or even from what they've talked about in their introductions. If there's anything in particular that resonates or has made you curious, please pop something in the Q&A. We may address it as we go, or we may address questions right at the end as well. So please feel free to interact in that way. So we've had the introductions, which has talked about a little bit about the framing and also a little bit about the passions and perspectives that we have around the table. I'm wondering if we could talk about particularly the nature of the problem. What is our inclusion challenge when it comes to Aotearoa? And Kim, I'm going to ask you to jump in first here, especially given the way in which you've developed the 5-point plan, because you had, obviously, the 5-point plan was developed for a reason. Talk to us a bit about some of the reasons, some of the things you saw through your evidence work that highlight, I guess, the challenges around inclusion that we have.
Thanks, Andrew. Happy to. To start off with, it's just worth sort of recounting the kind of 4 broad areas that people tend to touch on when they think about digital inclusion. Accessibility is number 1. And so often people do think accessibility is just getting access to the connectivity. And it's not just that, it's the affordability of the connectivity. It's access to devices and programs and applications that are accessible depending on your needs as well. Those are kind of huge issues, and affordability of that as well. The skills you need to kind of navigate the digital world. And as I mentioned before, having the motivation to get online and being able to trust that it's safe to do so. And I think that's where the link between digital inclusion and digital identity becomes quite strong. The tricky thing about knowing the size of the problem in New Zealand is the data's really bad. We don't have a lot of good information on this, but we have enough to know it's a problem. And the way I'd characterize it is, overall, you might say the digital divide in New Zealand is narrowing, as the connectivity gets around. A lot of people do have good digital skills, but unfortunately for some parts of our communities, some of our communities, it's deepening. That divide is getting a bigger issue. And that's why it's so important, to be thinking about what can we do, not just a one-size-fits-all approach. And I can see that Kay in the chat there is talking about those accessibility issues that are really important. For Internet New Zealand with the 5-point plan, it was one of those things we tried to kind of move pretty quickly when COVID hit to say if there was ever a time that government was going to pay decent attention to digital inclusion, it was probably now. So our plan isn't perfect, but what we wanted to do was to try, there were so many of us saying to government, oh, you should do this and do that. We thought maybe we could try and make it less noisy, a bit easier for government if we all joined up around 5 things, and that's not everything that you need to do, but it's a starting point. So we talk about, number one, affordable connectivity, and particularly thinking about how can you connect that to people's housing situations. As well. Do we need to have subsidies there? Can we hook up all our public housing so that, you've got internet right there along with your electricity and other things? Secondly, devices. We saw some great stuff happening during COVID. We could see that when the government wanted to, it could move and get devices out to kids. But there are a lot of other people in New Zealand who can't afford devices. So we need to think about how can we get those to them. And then wraparound support for your newly connected. We could see a lot of people, oh, here's a modem in the post. How do I hook that up? And how do I use this device? And there are so many organizations in our communities working hard and working for free, doing their best to try and help people with the skills they need. And what we were saying was way more support needed to support those community organizations and fund them properly. And then digital skills more generally, our businesses, a lot of them were saying, hey, we're going to need to be more online now. How do we kind of make the most of that and on an ongoing basis to get more of our small businesses tech savvy, and those who've recently lost their jobs, could they be retraining into digital careers and perhaps improving the diversity question that we've heard about today? And then last up, it was, the connectivity hasn't got everywhere, folks. There are still places who don't have reliable connectivity, and it isn't reliable enough. So that was our motivation.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks. And that please do encourage you. I know Kay's posted up a link to the Internet New Zealand 5-point plan and some of the background, and actually your blog post, Kim, on that, which is a really good articulation of it as well. And one of the things I've really appreciated about the way that you in particular have addressed this is not from you're not presenting this as, hey, we've got the answers. And this is what everyone needs to do. You're inviting people to a conversation and on a journey and bringing a collaborative voice to try and address some of those systemic challenges and issues as well. So shout out to you and the team at Internet New Zealand for doing it in that way. I'm interested too, just bouncing out of that part of the discussion. Pam and Janelle, you both work in education, and Pamela in particular, you referred to this in your introduction about some of the accessibility challenges for students who've made it all the way to tertiary education, but there's still barriers for them. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
So affordability would have been the biggest barrier for many of those students. And for them, it wasn't just the fact that their student loan and allowance is a significant contribution to the family revenue. The family don't have the spaces, don't have internet access at home. They have far higher economic priorities than the very high cost in New Zealand, relatively high cost of internet access. And actually, we also had some kids in parts of Auckland, I think that's mainly on the western coast, where actually you don't even have good access, even if they do have the finances to afford it. So there are parts quite close within a daily commute to Auckland City where there isn't access. It is that simple. But affordability would have been our biggest problem. And we saw it in our access to the online resources that were being provided. So all our classes were going online. And we could see that tail off. Yes, there were certain groups of students for whom online was never how they wanted to study. And so that's why we've gone straight back into campus on classroom delivery for second semester. But even for those who were trying, there's a huge difference between the well-off and the non-well-off, as we can measure them from where they've come from in Auckland City, what schools they've come from, and their preparation.
And that's such an important point. You talked about that a little bit before as well.
Yes.
It's not just the affordability. It's not just having an extra few dollars to spend on a broadband plan, right? It's the context of you just referred to it, the importance of a student loan or a student allowance to the household income, right? So it's really an upshot of poverty in a way.
Yes. I have no illusions that the students on the whole who come to the University of Auckland are not in the lowest income groups within Auckland City. I realise that they're definitely not, but for our low income students, even having that simple internet plan at home is impossible. So they're totally dependent on the common rooms that we provide. So we have quite extensive internet access through our libraries, through our Taitonga campus in the south, where they can go and study, and that's their dependency. And of course, when they were closed, because we weren't allowed to have them open, they then had no access.
Yeah, wow, it's staggering, isn't it? Janelle, I'm sure you've got similar stories in terms of your work with CORE, right?
Yeah, and education's a real interesting one, right? Because we've got equity problems for Africa within the whole system, and technology is just a little part of that. But in of itself, the education system wasn't actually designed to be conducive to Indigenous people. It was designed from a Western world perspective, the content, the delivery. So in of itself, that becomes a barrier to education, and then throw tech and money and affordability and all of those other things in there, and we're starting to pile inequity on top of inequity, and of course those at most risk are our Indigenous whānau for a number of reasons. And so yeah, lockdown, you know, I was working, I don't work for the Ministry of Education, but I was certainly working to support them to get as many resources as they could out the door. And I don't know if you saw the news, but they ordered these wonderful little servers that could go out to every home to ensure that kids had connectivity. And they all arrived too late because they were all coming from overseas. And then, you know, Auckland Boys Grammar got 300 of them, and the, you know, other kura, Decile 1 and 2 could have got 4, and they came too late and the schools were open, and all of those kinds of issues happened. But I think for me, the biggest missing piece of the conversation has to be around the tikanga. And by tikanga, I mean our approach to learning, because there were, I will say this, there were a bunch of whānau who had connectivity and made a choice based on their values and the ways of their home to not allow their kids to be learning online during that time. And some of that was because the conversation wasn't had. They didn't have a kōrero with whānau around the importance of learning online and what that might look like and what that could include and what it may not include. So learning at home with mum how to make parawa, how to make bread, is just as much of a valuable learning experience as sitting for an hour online. But because of the urgency of what happened, there wasn't time, I guess, for those conversations. And so some of the inequities were unavoidable. I know that, but I think they could have been lessened with conversation, with more kōrero and some more transparent conversation. So yeah, inequity between the haves and the have-nots in this space is probably fundamentally going to change and impact on our future workforce. So we actually can't afford to sit around and talk about it any longer. At some point, we've got to do something because this generation of kids are going to go into the workforce having not had opportunities that, in my opinion, are absolutely must-haves. You know, that they shouldn't depend on how wealthy you are or where you live in the world. These are absolute expectations that our kids have access to learning. So yeah. Aroha mai, I get on this fucker and get all passionate about it.
Well, I'm gonna ask an equally passionate person in Kei. And you've been working, I know you've been working on the front line in some healthcare delivery services around this, and again, some of the technology and the connectivity challenges. And indeed, the reason why you started AHO has a lot to do with this, right? So tell us what your perspective on the challenge is.
I agree with the speakers that have just gone before me, and Janelle, I think, has hit the nail on the head around equity.
Sorry, Kei, you're a little bit quiet there. Can you?
Sorry, good everyone. Just wanted to say I agree with Janelle, and she hit the nail on the head around issues of equity and access. And we don't have time to muck around, but there's so many wonderful challenges for us to solve, from workforce capacity of Indigenous people to infrastructure ownership to quite delicate negotiations that tribal entities are having with government, with policy levers as well, and then this significant growth in technology and emerging technologies, and what does that mean for us as Indigenous populations and also as New Zealand citizens, as many of the digital identity products that are coming onto the market are not necessarily being born out of New Zealand, and therefore their interests may not necessarily be solely on protecting the rights and data sovereignty of New Zealand citizens. And I think that's just a consideration when we're looking at what role do industry play, and then also what role do entrepreneurs play, and then also what are some basic human needs as well. And I really like this because we're talking about diversity and inclusion. I did really go deeply into the space because I think we're asked often about diversity and inclusion as Indigenous people generally, and in that framing, it's asking like, who's in the room. Firstly saying who's in the room, whereas equity is saying who's trying to get into the room but can't, because the presence of the room is under constant threat of erasure. Or inclusion will ask, how has everyone's ideas been heard? So are we being inclusive of all people? Whereas justice is saying whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't in the majority. And then diversity may ask, well, how many of X number of people, minority groups, etc., do we have this year than last? Versus an equity question, which is what conditions have we created that help maintain certain groups to be the majority in regards to the management and protection of identity. And then again, inclusion will ask, is this environment safe for everybody to feel like they belong, yet whose safety is being sacrificed to make others feel more comfortable? And I think those are quite important conversation points to have when we're talking about inclusion, because often it's about how can the other which is usually us who are coloured or different, be included in a mainstream system, versus how can you also actually be included in our way of operating and our way of thinking, and what might that look like? So I think that framing is quite important. So coming back to AHO, and our aspirations in the digital identity space is, again, pieces of information, whatever they may be, or pieces of data, are very important. However, how might we explore identity from a much broader frame? As in, my identity is not just pieces of information, they are sacred pieces of information, including just normal information pieces as well, dependent on which environment I'm working in. But I want the choice. I want the choice to be able to decide, one, can I have the ability to verify my identity? Can my own community, can my own family verify and vouch for who I am? And can I have the freedom to do that as a citizen of this country? And also, which I really do appreciate, Department of Internal Affairs, because there's an openness to explore the custodians of identity. It doesn't necessarily have to sit within the Crown or government. It could also sit within community. And I really appreciate that we're really pushing the edges there as a nation in New Zealand. And I guess if we look at the broader global context, what can other countries learn from us as we're starting to co-create this trust framework, which is a tikanga, or a bundle of rules and customs that help protect citizens' rights, but also help direct how the industry are going to respond to the requirements that this country needs to put in place to protect citizen data. And so when I think about COVID-19 and the fact that most information has been centralised or housed by government versus it being sitting in the hands of citizens, I think that we're in this real significant tipping point. But I also foresee there's still a lot of fear of people not necessarily wanting to embrace this technological future because they don't want to be tracked, or they don't want to lose their own personal freedoms, and they don't want their data to be misused in a way that has not been given in absolute consent. So I hope that we can shift that through providing the control of your sacred information and putting that back into the hands of our communities, our families and households.
Kia ora. Thank you, Kay Marie. You navigated a lot of territory there, right? And please, I'm sure there's questions sparking out of what Kay Marie has just talked about as well. So please put them in the Q&A as we move through this. And you referred to just in that the work of the DAA. So I'm going to come to you, Elena. And specifically, really appreciate the way, and you talked about it in your introduction, you deliberately took an approach of not sitting in, a little sterile whiteboard room, putting notes up and thinking about policy. Mm-hmm. You did some very proactive engagement to find out what the real issues and challenges were. And you were a little bit surprised too, right? With some of the stuff you came out with.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, we were always really conscious of wanting to ensure, as I said earlier, that we take a really open approach to the development of the evidence to inform our work. And we're just quite opportunistic, really, to for example, see the work that Kay Marie and AHO were doing, but also some of the conversations that are happening within academia and within, say, for example, the Data Iwi Leaders Group around Māori data sovereignty and digital sovereignty also in that context. So I guess just touching on some of the points made earlier by Janelle in particular, I was just watching earlier this morning a video clip that Kay Marie sent me featuring Tahu Kukutai, a demographer, based at Waikato University in New Zealand, and talking about Indigenous perspectives on digital identity. And, she made the point that there's an assumption that the digitization of services and digital identity being a critical step in this as a pathway to democratization, and that it will, go some way to help level out, 100+ years of colonial injustice. But, of course, Tahu's sage advice was that we really need to think carefully and to think through this carefully. So in the context of digital inclusion, as Janelle mentioned earlier, it's impossible to have conversations about inclusion without discussing system exclusion, which of course is intergenerational and carries, you know, significant mamae or hurt, all of which can contribute to a distrust in the system, and be that whether the system is run by private corporates within New Zealand or internationally, or by government. But I know that government, you know, often provides leadership in this space. So it's been really great to be able to work with entrepreneurs, you know, the tech stars that we have here in Aotearoa, trying different things and working within our communities, because that's where that expertise lies. Those are the practitioners, and I think we need to, you know, I think outside-in approaches are really great around inclusion, trying to understand what's working well in communities so that we can scale those things and getting better coherence. But more and more, I think we should be taking inside-out approaches, and that's where I like the idea of, you know, where the policy begins. It's life and government agencies, you know, we really need to reimagine a future state where those that are impacted most by digital exclusion and those with expertise working in community leadership roles are part of that solution design, working alongside policy and decision makers.
Wow, that was profound. In a really cool way. I loved what you said there, the inside out. That's got me fascinated. I like that idea, and I'm wondering, can we perhaps the other panelists, just taking that sort of thread of an idea of an inside out, how do we address this from the inside out? You've already touched on it a little bit, but I'd appreciate, I guess, your other thoughts on that. What does next step look like when we're doing that inside out design? Please feel free to jump in. If not, I'm going to pick someone, but you know. Go for it, Kim.
I was just, oh no, Kim, please, you go right ahead. I will take far too much time. You go right ahead.
Just a quick thought about digital skills provision. So, you know, hopefully we're going to see a lot more government funding going towards digital skills. And the inside out idea, you know, thought for me is it's not about picking a provider, you know, who has a digital skills program and saying, please deliver this to all the people in New Zealand. I think it's more about creating a network of community organisations who already know what their people need, and they're already out there delivering other services and saying, can we help you to also help your people to get into the digital world? Yeah, so that would be my inside out thing.
Beautiful. I like that inside out thing.
Tautoko, Kim, and I would just say that along with digital skills, for me, a wiro in particular for government agencies would be to support capability development of the amazing public servants who, there are a big bunch that just want to serve, but you know, we really need to focus on relational skills as part of that digital mindset, so that we can have that aroha mai, aroha atu approach to the mahi that we do.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Just to add, oh sorry Janelle, you go, Hua.
I was just going to say, in schools and in education, we talk about digital literacy as one of the most important literacies to have. It's reading, writing, maths, digital, you know, and that is what we are doing. You know, we're really embedding those digital skills into teaching and learning programs. And of course, it's not consistent. I wish it was. We're getting there, but obviously it relies quite a bit on the confidence, the ability, the openness of the kaiako in the classroom as to how much that's going to come through. But these kids are coming out quite digitally literate. What they don't have by osmosis, because literacy can happen by tutu on your phone, they don't have digital savvy, as we call it, and the safety understanding, and that's another part of some of the mahi we need to do in schools. But what I would say is COVID, we've got this amazing opportunity now where people are far, far more hungry and open and willing to explore this. And I think the mana associated with these skills is actually heightening, right? And people are going, wow, I didn't realize that it would be important for me to know this, but maybe I do need to know this now. So that's why conversations like this are so important that we're having them now. And I agree, it's not just for the people in the top offices with the good views to have opportunities to develop their digital literacy. It needs to be for everybody, and it's hugely important. All parts of the whānau, all members of the whānau have got those opportunities.
And I guess to add to that, I think what I'm seeing is an ownership of the narrative, and so seeing people starting to bring our own stories so that Indigenous people can see themselves in technology in a way that reflects us. And I think that's pretty exciting for us to take space here. But I also am seeing a real openness for the sector to welcome in Indigenous perspectives, tribal knowledge, and also partnerships, which I think is very important as well, because, as I said before, the technologies have been designed by many companies from outside of New Zealand or outside of our jurisdictions, and I think there's some broader challenges that we need to consider around intellectual property and intellectual property protection, and some broader policy that's happening. And I guess I'm concerned that with COVID-19, are our rights actually been impacted on as a result of governments trying to get access to information, where they're trying to keep their citizens safe, but it also may come at the cost of our own privacy. So I think we just need to think about what does that really look like in the digital identity space as well.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it comes, there's actually a number of questions in the Q&A that go partly to that point, but also addressing questions of, right, who gets to decide? Is it a role for government? Is it a role for industry? Is it a role for someone else? Is it a role for community, as Kim was just talking about? And I hope we have actually navigated that in some degree. It's something for everybody. But there's also, there was another question around, yeah, it was seeking out the community inputs, if you like, that, you know, the revelations too often we see from the policymakers who say, and I'm quoting here from the question, good point, I never would have thought of that, when it's actually self-evident to the community groups that you're working with. It's the, I guess, institutional blindness component, which comes, there's an aspect of trust in this. A number of you have talked about trust. In this, and I guess a propensity for us to, I guess, demand trust in a way, or try and convince people that that they should trust us. And certainly one thing I like to do is flip that conversation around and say, well, how actually can I act in a trustworthy manner, which is going to invite participation by choice and not by duress. Pam, I'd be interested in your views when it comes to that sort of building that trust environment in a hugely complex mini ecosystem that is a university. What do you see there? You're on mute at the moment.
Yeah. I was sort of harking back, thinking back to the earlier question. The University of Auckland has a very considerable Pacific community, and it was within that community, rather than among our Māori students, that we had the greatest level of inability to pick up the digital courses that we offer. And that's going to create, as those people become more digitally literate and aware, an even bigger gap than there currently exists between our students and as they get educated, and their parents and their prior generation. I think one of the strengths that I keep hearing about the way in which the Pacific community is sort of contrary to all of the public health kind of criteria, where you have high levels of poverty, but you still got good social outcomes for kids, it's the bonding within the community. And one of the things we probably risk in this digital divide between them is the breakdown of that bonding. It's not an answer to your question. The answer to the question was we had to try and provide information to students. We have to try as many different ways as we can to provide students access. And you have to think of it from a student-centric view, not from an institutional-centric view. And that's very difficult for a big institution. Turning things around so you think about how the student themselves would be thinking of this is quite hard. Goes against many, many years of academic tradition for a number of our staff.
Ouch. Janelle, I can see you nodding your head there.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like I said, I think education internationally, actually on a global scale, needs to actually have a stronger focus on those most underserved by it. The conversation has to start there. And that's not exclusively Indigenous peoples, but a big chunk of those most underserved are Indigenous peoples. And so if we really want to tackle equity, you know, one of the things that I say often is, you can just about speak to anybody who works in any kind of industry or profession and say to them, what are the barriers to someone who perhaps doesn't have money or opportunity? What are the barriers to them having a career in your profession? And almost everybody can actually articulate what the barriers are. Most of us know what they are. The bigger problem is tackling them. You know, we can say, well, it's this and it's this and it's this, and those things are usually so big and so hard and so systemic and so ingrained in the way things are here and the way we do things, that they're too hard to tackle. And I guess my challenge is in the times that we find ourselves in now, we can no longer afford to leave them in the too hard basket, and actually we can't solve them by ourselves. We need a collective contribution to actually identifying inequity and then tackling it. So it's not enough just to name it anymore. We actually have to name it, say it out loud, then mobilize to doing something about it. So yeah.
Excellent. Cue 5-point plan discussion, Kim. I know you've already covered it, but what have you seen in terms of the, I guess, the response to that, as well as what role now do you play in advancing that?
What we're now waiting for is to see what the government's action plan will look like. So I think Chris Farfoy is planning on releasing that next month. So some of you may have seen, for the benefit of our Australian friends, about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years ago, the government came out with its blueprint for digital inclusion, sort of said what was important, where we needed to go. What we're expecting now is a more granular action plan that talks about investments. So there's quite a bit of money not yet allocated in the budget. So what we're hoping is the minister will release an action plan, areas of investment with big dollars next to them. That will be awesome. That's what we're hoping for. What is our role? Well, then obviously it's not just up to government to do these things. There's a whole lot of us outside of government who want to help. So the next step for us is thinking, you know, under each of those points in the 5-point plan, who wants to get together to make some other stuff happen? You know, so if government's doing its bit, what are the things that we can all mobilize on? My personal one that I am really passionate about is getting the connectivity through public housing. Can we work with Kind of Order, and for our Australian friends, that's sort of like our Department of Housing, to get like wholesale connectivity into public housing so it's affordable. That would be so awesome. That's my top pick.
Good. Thank you. I'm conscious we have 6 minutes left. So what I'd like to do is each of you, if you could, in 30 seconds, I know this is impossible, right? But in 30 seconds, I guess just sum up your thoughts and probably your challenge. What is it that we do collectively, and what is someone like me do, in order to take their next step in this journey. We're going to start with Kay Marie. You just flash back up on the video, so you're up.
I would summarise in saying that identity is a much broader topic, and so I think inclusion or diversity really needs to sit in a brave conversation with Indigenous populations around what that might look like. I think that we need to really focus on broadening our workforce to bring in and have a lot of affirmative action in that space around Indigenous populations and people of colour. And I also think that government still need to push further into expanding its policy levers and opening its policy levers so that we can have that equal playing field that we're aiming for together.
Sure, thank you. Pamela, get your closing thoughts and challenge.
There's a huge challenge in addressing the poverty issues in some of our cities. As far as the IT workforce is concerned, the biggest challenge to diversifying it, because we've been trying to do that through something called the ICT Graduate School, is the schooling preparation of our students. So with the level of mathematics literacy that exists through schooling, a lot of the digital careers that would be really beneficial and vice versa would benefit a lot from a more diverse workforce are just not available. Certainly not, I mean, yes, you can do the data entry ones, but certainly not the meaningful careers. And so unless we start addressing that kind of literacy at the same level as we're doing others, we're not going to diversify the workforce. Thank you.
Cool. Good. That's a good insight. Very good insight. Elena, I'm going to pass to you.
Kia ora. No, I think I touched on it earlier, but look, the whittle that I have wearing my government hat would be along the lines of let's walk the talk. And I know that sounds really cliche, but I really would like to encourage all the entrepreneurs, and I sort of like to think of them as the slightly rebellious kind of individuals and teams that like to kind of do really awesome things within the public sector. To get close to those movers and shakers, the peeps that you've got on the call today, and to think about, whilst we continue to, you know, try and diversify our workforce within the public sector and in these digital roles and teams, think about how we can amplify the work and leadership of those currently doing amazing things in our communities in that technology and digital realm, so that we can get that greater penetration in the meantime. So yeah, kia ora.
Love it. Kia ora. Thank you. Kim.
So hard to summarize, but I might just throw in a challenge that I don't think I've mentioned before, and I think there's a coordination one. So you get so many people wanting to help make this digital inclusion thing happen, and there's just a risk we all start doing our own things. So the importance of this before starting something, thinking, oh, who else is out there already doing it? At Internet New Zealand, we're trying to do one little thing to help with that. We've got a digital inclusion website coming up soon, which will replace the old digital inclusion map. So you'll be able to look all around the country and see what's happening and which places. And if anyone would like to help us populate that, this is a shameless advertisement for to get in touch, please.
Love it. Excellent. And Janelle.
Kia ora. Oh gosh, I just took all everything that's already been said. The things that I wrote down, I guess, is around inclusion needing to start with mana whenua, or the people of those countries. That's where the conversation around inclusion needs to start with Indigenous people. And so that's one of my whittle, is start the conversations there with our Indigenous people of the land. And the other thing, and Kay Marie has talked about this a couple of times, and I fully tautoko this, that actually we've got to be really mindful with the word identity, and that we are not too narrow as to assume that there is one type of identity or one worldview or one perspective on identity, because I know I can speak for myself as Māori, my perspective as of what identity is might be quite different from someone else's. So I'm going to be really mindful about how we use that kupu, that word identity, and actually ensure that we understand that there is more than just a Western world view on what identity is and includes. And the last thing around the diversifying the sector, the whittle that I'm putting back to myself and to the education sector is actually we need to change the pedagogy of teaching and learning. If we want more kids in the tech sector, we need to figure out how to teach them better and how to make the programs that they come into far more engaging for them, far more equitable in terms of their access. And I don't want to see a kid who's not great at maths not get to do the design tech job that he's always dreamed of. That shouldn't be a barrier. We should be able to create training programs for our rangatahi and our kids that support their learning in context. This is the maths you need for this, as opposed to let's learn, I don't know, I've never had to measure the angle of a triangle in my adult life. I'm waiting for the opportunity because I spent many years learning and memorizing it. So, we need to actually start teaching our kids in real life contexts and hopefully engage them more in learning and give them more opportunities. So, kia ora.
Thank you, Janelle. And thank you all of your panelists for bringing your passion and your insight and your wisdom to this conversation, which is really, as we have covered, we're just scratching the surface. But there is work for us all here to do together. I'm conscious we are out of time. I am going to ask Janelle to close us in a moment with another karakia to finish us off and close off this part of the this part of our day. I would ask if I could get the Women in Identity ambassadors, if you could come back on video for a moment, because also want to thank you and encourage you and support you in the work that you are doing as well. So yes, thank you. Thank you all for the amazing stuff that you're doing, and we look very much forward to working a lot more with you as we continue this journey together. So thank you, and Janelle, if I could ask you to close this off with a karakia.
Kia ora. Kia ora everyone. Just so lovely to come together today for our wānanga and have this beautiful kōrero. Thank you for coming with open hearts and open minds and for sharing your whakaaro from your perspective, but more importantly, being open to hearing and considering the perspectives of others. So I'll close us with a karakia. I'd like to just mihi to those outside of Aotearoa, who I realise many of us that have bilingualised our language so much we forget about international audiences, and I'm one of those, and I just want to say that please know that we weren't trying to be exclusive. We've actually worked so hard at being bilingual, we forget about it. And so thank you for those that asked in the question. I went, oh, whoopsie, I need to be mindful about that in my kōrero as well. So thank you for listening and allowing us to share our thoughts. I'll close us with a karakia. Go well, be well, is going to be the essence of our karakia. Ngā mihi. Tēnei te Māori ka heke iho ki te whenua e takoto nei, he rangi atua, he rangi tipua, he rangi tawhito, I whiti ko te mātauranga, I tau ko te māramatanga, tēnei ka heketia kia wātia, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora, ngā mihi.
Thank you, everybody.
Kia ora.